The sun began to set, casting long golden streaks of light over the village. It was a quiet evening in Emeka's small village, but the atmosphere in his house was far from peaceful. Amara, Emeka's mother, was preparing dinner while her heart weighed heavily with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Her son, her firstborn, had just received his university admission letter, but in the back of her mind, she knew that there was no way they could afford the school fees. The house they lived in, a modest structure made from clay bricks and a thatched roof, stood as a constant reminder of their humble beginnings. Amara had spent years toiling away in the field, her hands cracked and callous from the hard work. Yet, despite her relentless efforts, there never seemed to be enough money. Her husband, Emeka's father, had left them years ago. His promise of support had quickly turned to dust, and she was left to raise her two children on her own. Emeka sat by the window, his fingers nervously tapping the letters he had held for the past hour. He stared at the words as if willing them to change. The admission letter was a gateway to a future he had always dreamed of, a future where he could escape the shackles of poverty, but there was no way he could pay the fees. Mama, I have to go to the city. I'm going to see Uncle Olu, Emeka said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an undertone of worry. Amara paused, whipping her hands on her apron. Your uncle has always been well off, Emeka, but he is unpredictable. I am not sure he will help. Emeka had heard stories about his father's brother, Uncle Lulu, a wealthy man who lived in the city. His uncle was known for his generosity, but Emeka's mother had often spoken about how unreliable he could be. Still, Emeka had no other choice. If he didn't try, he would never know. The following morning, Emeka set out on the long journey to the city, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and fear. The roads were long and dusty, but his determination kept him going. He couldn't shake the image of his mother's worried face as she waved him off at the gate of the village. When Emeka finally arrived in the city, the contrast was staggering. The bustling city, the tall buildings, and the noise were all foreign to him. He had only heard stories of this place, and now he was here, standing before his uncle's apartment building. Uncle Olu's apartment was as grand as Emeka had imagined, tall, sleek, and modern. Emeka rang the doorbell, his heart racing. A few moments later, Uncle Olu appeared at the door, dressed in a fine suit, a look of surprise on his face as he saw Emeka standing there. Emeka, what brings you here? Uncle Olu asked, his tone warms up distance. Uncle, I've been admitted into the university, but I don't have the money to pay the fees. Mama and I. Before Emeka could finish, Uncle Olu held up his hand. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. We are family. Family helps each other, right? I'll send the money soon. Emeka felt a wave of relief wash over him. His uncle's words felt like a lifeline. He thanked Uncle Olu profusely and left, eager to get back to the village and share the good news with his mother. But as the days passed, Emeka's excitement began to fade. Uncle Olu promises were never fulfilled. Days turned into weeks and still there was no word from him. Emeka called and each time he was met with promises of soon and I will send the money, but nothing ever came. The deadline for the school fees was fast approaching and Emeka's frustration grew. He couldn't understand why his uncle, who seemed so willing to help, wasn't following through. His bitterness began to form like a thick cloud in his chest. How could he do this to me? Emeka thought. He is rich, he has everything, and he can't even help his own family when they need him? With no other choice, Emeka turned to odd jobs, cleaning houses, washing cars, anything that could earn him some money. The work was drilling and his body ached with exhaustion, but he didn't care. He had a goal, the university. Amara did what she could, contributing the small amount of money she made from her farming. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Together, they scrapped enough to cover the school fees, though it was with a heavy heart that Emeka handed the money over to the university. It wasn't the help he had hoped for, but it was enough to get him started. Emeka entered university, feeling both victorious and defeated. The bitterness towards his uncle gnawed at him, but he tried to focus on his studies. He had made it this far. He wouldn't let anything stop him now. University life was both challenging and fulfilling. Emeka thrived academically, pushing himself harder with each passing semester. He graduated with honors, his heart swelling with pride. But when he began his search for a job, the reality of the world he had entered hit him like a wall. The job market was brutal. Employers demanded experience that Emeka didn't have, and the competition was fierce. He sent out applications by the dozens, but there was always silence in return. Days turned into weeks, and still no offer came through. Emeka had saved a little from his time working part time during school, but it wasn't nearly enough to survive in the city. His savings dwindled, and the stress began to take its toll. The weight of his mother's expectations, his father's absence, and his uncle's broken promises hung heavy on his shoulders. He finally swallowed his pride and decided to return to Uncle Olu. After all, his uncle had promised to help him once before, and surely, now that Emeka had graduated, he would be able to keep his words. Emeka arrived at Uncle Olu's apartment, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. But when he spoke to his uncle, the response was the same. Don't worry, I'll see what I can do. We are family, Emeka. Weeks passed, and once again, there was no word from Uncle Olu. No job, no help, no follow up. Emeka's anger fled, but he knew he couldn't rely on anyone but himself. He began taking on odd jobs again, anything to make ends meet. His pride had been hurt, but he wouldn't give up. Not now. After months of struggling, Emeka finally managed to secure a job at a small architectural firm. It wasn't his dream job, but it paid the bills. Slowly but surely, Emeka started to rebuild his life. As his career began to take off, so did his resentment for his uncle. How could he have promised to help me, only to leave him stranded? Emeka knew one thing for certain. He would never be like Uncle Olu. He would never let someone down the way he had been let down. Years passed, and Emeka's life became more stable. He had saved enough to buy a small house for himself, and his career as an architect was flourishing. But just as Emeka thought, his struggles were behind him. New challenges emerged. His younger sister Ngozi had graduated from university and gotten married, but her life too was filled with hardship. Her husband lost his job, and soon they were struggling financially. Emeka's responsibilities grew. He sent money to his mother every month, helping her with her farming expenses, and now he found himself supporting his sister and her children. Ngozi's three young children became another burden on his shoulder. The pressure was overwhelming. Emeka worked long hours, barely making ends meet. Every time Ngozi or his nephew and his niece came to him for help, he did his best to support them, but it was never enough. The financial strains was suffocating. He kept putting off the help they needed, always promising, "I'll do it later." One day, while scrolling through his phone at work, Emeka stumbled upon an old message from Chidi, his sister's eldest son. Chidi was asking for help with his school fees. Emeka's heart skipped a beat as he glanced in the middle on his office wall. The man who stared back at him was no longer the hopeful young graduate. He was a man overwhelmed by responsibilities, just as Uncle Olu had been years ago. In that instance, Emeka realized that he had become the very person he had sworn never to be. He had become the man who promised help but never followed through. He had become his uncle. Emeka immediately picked up the phone to call Uncle Olu, intending to apologize for harboring so much resentment. But when he dialed the number, there was no answer. He tried again, only to hear the news from Uncle Olu's wife. "Emeka, I'm sorry. Olu passed away last year. He never got the chance to see you again." Emeka collapsed into his chair, his world spinning. The man who had caused him so much pain, the man who had broken his trust, was gone. And now he would never have the chance to understand why. The bitterness that had burdened in his chest for so long turned into a deep sorrow. Tears streamed down Emeka's face as he realized the truth. His uncle had carried his own burdens, perhaps more than Emeka could ever understand. Perhaps his uncle's failure to help was not out of malice, but from his own struggles. In the days that followed, Emeka's heart softened. He made a vow to never be like Uncle Olu, not out of pride, but out of love and understanding. He reached out to Chidi and the other children in his family, explaining his situation whenever he couldn't meet their needs. He would no longer make promises he couldn't keep, but he would always be honest with them. Emeka learned that life was not about blaming others for their shortcomings, but understanding that each person has their own struggles. And through that understanding, he broke the cycle of bitterness that had been passed down through generations. As he walked through life, Emeka carried with him the lesson that you should never judge someone until you have walked a mile in their shoes. And in doing so, he became the kind of man his family needed, someone who understood, who helped when he could, and who never promised what he couldn't give.